right. Thank you so much, folks, for being early and for being on time. And again, thank you so much, those of you who have typed your full names into the chat. I'm very excited to be here. I mean, I say that all the time, but I truly am excited to be here with you today, particularly focusing on this particular topic of, and I'm going to use the former name, developing discrepancy. And we will talk more about the fact that it's a former name as we go forward in this conversation. But the name we all are probably pretty familiar with this particular strategy is developing discrepancy. I must say that I'm prompted to do something slightly different than the way I would have imagined that I was going to facilitate this learning community conversation. And I'm inspired to do it slightly different because of the people that are in this learning community, many of you whom I've had the opportunity to be in a learning community with before. And in the one remaining moment that we have before we officially get started, I'll explain to you what I'm going to do slightly differently. We will take care of the logistical details of our conversation, which is what we normally do. There is a scenario that I want to absolutely make sure that we get to today. So I am going to ask for 2 volunteers to read this scenario out loud. And what I'd like to do after we take care of the logistics, and again, I'm inspired by the people that are here to do this way, is what I'd like us to do is I'd like us to, with our 2 volunteers, to read this scenario out loud. Hello, Amber. Thank you for your message. Good to see you. What I'd like to do is I'd like to read the scenario out loud, and then I'd like us to just share our general impressions of the scenario. And then I'd like us to go into, oh, wonderful, wonderful. That's a great idea. Thank you so much. And then I'd like us to go into some of the content that we're going to cover today. But I'd like us to come back to the scenario specifically from the perspective of what was formerly called developing discrepancy. Okay? So I'm inspired because of who's here today to, once we take care of the logistical details, to expose all of us to the scenario so that we can sit with it for a little while. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that that will be an effective choice for our learning community conversation. So I daren't wait any longer, if daren't is a word. I dare not wait any longer to officially begin. And let me say a very, very warm welcome back to folks who are here, whom I've had the opportunity to be in learning communities in person and online with before. So welcome back. And for those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. And thank you for making the time to be part of this learning community conversation today. My name is Paul Warren, and I am a research project director at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. I also am very fortunate to be a senior staff trainer and curriculum writer for the Northeast and Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center. I have been forced, as many of you know, to go to Puerto Rico, to St. Thomas, and to St. Croix, actually all 3 places in a row once, to do training. But I couldn't be happier to be here with you today to focus on what was formerly called developing discrepancy. I'm also a social worker by training, and I began my social service career in 1991, providing direct services to people living with HIV and AIDS, and I did that work for a little over 12 plus years. Again, very, very happy to have the opportunity to be facilitating this learning community conversation about what was formerly called developing discrepancy. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll take care of a couple of logistics, and then we will look at the scenario. And again, Jessica, thank you. And thank you to everybody else who's modeled so brilliantly. I'll say it one more time and then one final time. If you have not yet done so, there are 57 of us in the learning community. If you have not yet done so, please type your full name and where you're from if you're at a particular organization or program into the chat, so we have a timestamp that you're here so that you can get a full 2 hours of credit for participating in this learning community conversation. And thank you to all of you who've done that already so far. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to actually ask you to use the chat now to indicate by typing the letter Y if you can actually see the screen and see the slide. Now, I can't see you, but I believe you can see me and the slide. So it looks like excellent. It looks like most of you can see that. That's great. So again, our learning community conversation, getting unstuck, developing discrepancy to move forward. We'll leave it at that at this particular moment. Because we are a learning community, because there are 59 of us together today, and because this conversation is meant to be responsive and relevant to the actual work you're doing, what we talk about may not reflect the official position of our funder. And that's okay, because our funder funds these learning community conversations in order to support you in your work and help you to refine and adopt ways of being, methods of communication that are going to make you more effective and fulfilled in your work. As the 59 of us engage in this learning community conversation, I'd like us all to be intentional and mindful about words and the use of language as we talk to each other. We want to use language and words that respect, welcome, and include all 59 of us in this learning community. We come from all different places, all different experiences. We have uniquely framed and evolved values, attitudes, and beliefs. And in our learning community together, we want to be using words and language that are respectful, welcoming, and inclusive to everybody that's here today. PowerPoint, thank you very much for making it slide official, exclamation point, welcome. So glad you're here. Thank you for making the time to participate in this 2-hour learning community conversation. This is the last time I will say it, and you can read it here. If you have not yet done so, please make sure to type your full name into the chat. And if you're sharing your computer with anybody, please share their full names and where they're from as well in the chat. Now, there will be a brief evaluation at the conclusion of this learning community conversation. There are times when I absolutely fail at this. I hope today will not be one of them, but what I'm going to ask is that I'm going to try and leave some time at the end for you to complete this evaluation so that you can go on to your next appointment, maybe 5 minutes or so, if possible, so that you can go on to your next appointment or commitment or meeting, and then you will have done the evaluation already. So I'm going to do my best. I don't always succeed, but I will do my best. Now, you may recall, and some of you have already sent me some private messages, and I thank you for your communication. You may recall that when you registered for this learning community conversation, you actually agreed to have a working camera and a working microphone and to be on camera for the full 2 hours. Now, having said that, let me acknowledge I respect the fact that there may be things that you need to attend to. And attending to something doesn't mean that you're doing your job simultaneously as to you're participating in this conversation. Attending to something means somebody knocks on your door, you need to address what's happening, or you're expecting a package and it arrives, and you step away for a moment. What I would ask is if you need to step away for a moment, just send me a private chat message, send it just to me, and just say, I'll be right back. And then take care of what you need to take care of, and then rejoin the learning community. Stepping away is certainly acceptable and understandable. What I would ask is that you avoid stepping out. Stepping out is duration based. It means that you're gone for like 15, 20, 30 minutes. I'm sorry to say that's not acceptable for this learning community. And Zoom does an excellent job of monitoring stepping away and stepping out. So again, what I would ask is if you need to step away, don't hesitate to do so. I respect that. Take care of what you need to take care of. Just let me know in the message that you're stepping away for a moment, and then just rejoin us. If you wouldn't mind, there are now 64 of us in the learning community. If you would, 65, if you wouldn't mind, please remain muted unless you have something that you want to say. Now, I personally do not have any objection to being interrupted mid-sentence. If you have something that you want to add, question, react to, don't hesitate to unmute and just say, hey, Paul, I'd like to jump in here for a minute. I don't mind being interrupted. In fact, I welcome it. What I would ask, though, is if John has the floor and he's making a point, or anybody else in the learning community has the floor and they're making a point, that you not interrupt them. So you're more than welcome to interrupt me. Please don't interrupt them. And unless you have something that you want to say, please remain muted just so that we can protect against any background noise. Thank you, Mandy. Thanks for typing your name in the chat and where you're from. Greatly appreciated. We are 65 strong in this learning community, folks. We are not necessarily going to agree. We're not all coming from the same place. We don't have to be on the same page. That is not the goal. The goal here is that we have a respectful, inclusive, and welcoming space for everyone who wants to be heard, and to be offered mutual respect in regard to that. This is a learning community. We don't have to all be on the same page, but what I would ask is that we definitely offer each other mutual respect. And again, folks, thank you for letting me know that if you're having camera problems, I greatly appreciate that. I'm just glad you're here, and please participate through the chat or unmuting or any other way you can. I understand the bandwidth concerns, and I'm just glad you're here, and I thank you for making the time. The final guideline that I'm going to ask everybody to speak to consider is making I statements. Sometimes in my role as the facilitator, I may make a generalization, and I will do my best to preface it that I'm about to make a generalization. What I would ask, though, is that we do our best to try and speak from the I. I believe this, I know this, I understand it this way. So those are the guidelines that I'd like us all to consider. And what I would, again, I thank you folks for sending me the issues related to camera. Again, glad you're here, and please participate with what you have. So I'm going to advance the slide before I make these two disclaimers, and then I'm just going to ask, can everybody agree to those guidelines as stated? And you can wave, nod, throw money, give a thumbs up, directly deposit into my checking account. Excellent. All right, good. Esma is not going to deposit into my checking account. That's okay, Esma. You don't need to. I'm just glad you're here. Excellent. Excellent. All right, good. So those are our guidelines, folks, as we, and thank you for the smiley face, Mandy. That's great. So we will definitely, those are our guidelines. Thanks, Sean. Those are our guidelines, and that is how we've agreed that we will interact with each other. Now, before we get to that scenario, I just have two disclosures that I want to make, and I want to just review quickly our learning objectives. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. Disclaimer number 1. Don't fail me now, Zoom. Here it is. Disclaimer number 1. This is a learning community conversation. It is not intended, and I know this will be no surprise. This is only 2 hours. It's not intended to be an intensive, deep look into the evidence-based practice of motivational interviewing. If you're interested in such a beast, a more intensive 6-hour, broken down in 2-hour sections, it's called the Theory and Practice of Motivational Interviewing. And I have the great opportunity to facilitate that learning community conversation. If indeed you're interested in a more in-depth review practice opportunity, please consider that. This is not that. Second disclosure. The conversation strategy of planting seeds, also known as developing discrepancy, is not exclusive or dependent on the practice of motivational interviewing. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I want to say a little bit about that. Thing number one that I want to say about that. The strategy of developing discrepancy has been renamed by Bill Miller and Stephen Rolnick in the 4th edition of their book on motivational interviewing. It has been renamed Planting Seed. Now, I'm very curious, and if anybody is willing to unmute, does anybody have any thoughts or reactions to the rename? It used to be called Developing Discrepancy by Miller and Rolnick. Now it's called Planting Seeds. Does anybody want to unmute and share any thought or reaction to that rename?
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
Elena here.
Hi, Elena. Good to hear your voice.
Thank you for sponsoring this and hosting it. You're such a great instructor that I'm always delighted to join your workshops.
Thank you. I'm going to have to deposit into your checking account now.
Yes.
Thank you, Elena. What did you want to say?
I kind of like the renaming because in my tradition I'm a Buddhist teacher. I teach
Yes.
Buddhist studies,
Yes.
and we very much emphasize watering the seeds, not watering the seeds, and recognizing the seeds, and
Yes.
because those are thoughts that are planted in our head, in our
Yeah.
subconscious sort of mind, and they spontaneously sometimes just sprout. And we need to be aware of what they are and how they impact our behavior and our thought processes. So I think discrepancy, it's something that really needs to be brought to awareness,
Mm-hmm.
and to plant the seed that there is the possibility of something else going on. Creating discrepancy is a wonderful seed that
Mm-hmm.
kind of opens a window to a new understanding.
Wow. Thank you, Elena. Opens a window to a new understanding. Direct quote. You heard it here. Elena said it. I just repeated it. Any other thoughts? And maybe we can hear from one other person. And John, I see that you wrote in the thing beginner in the chat, the thing in the chat, you wrote beginner's mind. Yeah. Okay. Amber writes in the chat. And Elena, did you want to say something else? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say totally for beginner's minds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Amber writes in the chat, I like the change to planting seeds because we are technically planting seeds in people and letting them water and grow their seeds without our help. Just my opinion. Thank you, Amber. Thanks. And Kim writes, love the book. Love that book, Beginner's Mind. And Kim, if you know the author of that book, feel free to type it in the chat, or if anybody else knows the author of that book, that's one of the benefits of being in the learning community. We can share resources with each other. But the title, I'm presuming, of that book is Beginner's Mind. All right. So, folks, I just wanted to be very clear about this name change. And it's a name change. Tiffany Garriga Columbia Green Addiction Coalition. Thank you. Oh, Tiffany, thank you so much. I thought for a minute that was the author of the book. Sorry, Tiffany. Thanks for putting your name in the chat. All right. So, oh, Kim writes Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, 50th Anniversary Edition paperwork. Okay.
By Suzuki Roshi.
By Suzuki Roshi. Excellent. Very good. Thank you so much, Elena. And Ashley writes, I like the idea of planting seeds because it takes the pressure off us as professionals being responsible for their change. Absolutely. And well said, Ashley, because they ultimately are responsible for their change, and planting seeds can help them in their process. And I'm going to say it this way very specifically. It can help them in their process of considering change. Because in order to make change, you need to go through the process of considering the change, usually. And that's because of the presence of something. And I almost just said it, but I'm holding myself back because we'll say it later. But the reason people need to go through the process of considering change is because of the presence of, and I'm going to stop there. Go ahead, John. John wants to say it, I think. Go ahead, John.
It's the presence of ambivalence.
It is. John read my mind. He's read the book. It is the presence of ambivalence about that change. And folks, if there's one thing you leave with from today, and I'm confident already, especially because of what Elena and others have said and what people have written in the chat, I'm confident that there's probably more than one thing you leave with today. But if there's one thing you leave with today, is remember that John said ambivalence, and you can think of ambivalence about a behavior change as an opportunity. It's an opportunity. So hopefully, if you walk away with one thing, you'll walk away with that. Forrest writes in the chat, hearing the words seeds makes me hear change talk. And that's what we want to hear. Absolutely, Forrest. And again, Forrest is really linking that to the practice of motivational interviewing, which, Forrest, you actually provide me with a wonderful opportunity to underline one other thing. And then we're quickly going to look at the goals and objectives and then the scenario. And that is, I want you to be very clear, folks, that the strategy of planting seeds is not necessarily the practice of motivational interviewing, nor do you need to be practicing motivational interviewing to plant seeds. Okay? So just keep that in mind too. And Forrest, your observation in the chat is very insightful, and you are absolutely correct, because seed planting can be a bridge to the evocation of change talk if we are practicing MI, and we don't need to be practicing MI in order to plant seeds. Kim writes in the chat, I like to introduce it as parts work. Part of me wants to take the next step, and part of me is scared to take the next step, not quite ready. Yeah, and Kim, I love that, and I love that phrase, parts work, because that is what ambivalence is. Part of me wants to go this way, and another part of me wants to stay where I am. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to share my screen again. And again, we are going to need 2 volunteers. I believe I have one already, but we are going to need 2 volunteers to read the scenario out loud. So again, the idea of exploring the idea or the experience of the stuck or circular dynamic that it can occur during conversations about change. And I don't know, and I'm very curious if if oh, and John, you're willing to read as well. Fantastic. Great. So I don't know, and I'm going to use this in the chat. There's 71 of us now, and I'm going to ask this in the chat, but has anyone ever been in a conversation with a patient, a participant, a consumer, or a client and felt that the conversation was stuck, or that it kept like doing like this circular, you kept just going around and around and around? Has anyone ever had that experience? And so far, 4-0, and John writes, oh, yes. And Amber writes, yes, I have. Kim writes, oh, yes, exclamation point. Elena writes, yes, in all caps. Excellent. So I mean, not excellent that you've had that experience. You all are normalizing. Yeah, and Tiffany writes, they stick to the script. Yes, double exclamation point. Yes, a lot of the times. And again, planting seeds can be a way to unstick and possibly move out of the circle and move forward. Possibly. It doesn't always work, but sometimes it can. Also, our goal is to employ this conversation strategy of planting seeds. And again, we can use it as a guide and as a way of possibly helping to move the conversation forward. Haidia writes, and I literally said, okay, we're at a stuck spot. I can't help if you're not willing to help yourself. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So those are the goals, and these are our learning objectives. Now, there are a lot of learning objectives here. In fact, if you count the bullets, if you just count them, there are 6. I'm confident that we are going to be able to achieve all of these in the 1.5 hours that we have remaining. And I'm going to do my best to leave that little bit of time at the end so you can complete the evaluations. Now, I am going to advance to the next slide, but I'm going to stop here because I really do want us to read the scenario out loud. So I'm going to share my screen, and I believe we have 2 volunteers who are willing to read. I believe, Haidia, you said you would read out loud, and John is willing to read out loud. So, Haidia, since you volunteered first, would you like to be the worker or would you like to be the client?
Oh, I can be the worker. It's fine.
Great. So, John, you'll be the client, and Haidia will be the worker. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you the scenario. You let me know if you can see it and if it's large enough for you to read, because I can maybe make it a little larger if you need to. But then we're just going to let our colleagues read it out loud to us, and then I'll just ask you a couple of questions. Okay? All right. I'm very excited to share this scenario with you, but I should stop saying that, because maybe it's going to be like, you're going to be like, well, what was the big deal? It's not that great of a scenario, but I've been wanting to share this scenario with the learning community to see what your reactions are to it. So here we go. And I will do my best to scroll down so that you can see what's coming next. Is that big enough? Does that look good?
Yeah.
John, is it okay for you?
That's fine, Paul. Thank you.
It's good. Okay, good. Okay, so whenever you're ready, you go. And John's character is Tara, and the other character is the counselor. So whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Okay. Hi, Tara. Good to see you. How are you doing today?
Just fine. Okay. You need to know I'm not going to long-term rehab. You, my probation officer, and the drug court want me to go, but I don't want to. All right. Jail isn't what I want either, but I'd rather do jail time so I can be done with all of this court crap.
I'm not here to force you to go to rehab.
Is that so? You know, it was you who sent out those referrals. And I just got a call from the intake lady at St. Agnes Long-Term Rehab. So informed me that they have a driver coming to pick me up in 2 days.
Well, you signed releases, and your probation officer told me you're going to go away for up to 3 years if you don't take this bed. Aren't you worried about how your kids will manage without you?
I'm worried about my kids. Plus, I don't want to leave my dog. I'm worried because my ex is a garbage father, and he doesn't like my dog. I'm so freaking sick of being controlled by the courts. I just can't take it anymore. Okay, I want my life back.
You're struggling to put your kids and dogs' needs first. You're so tired of being controlled by drug court, and going to jail feels like your only way to escape the interfering control of the court system.
Yeah, I don't see myself as having good options, okay? I need freedom from the courts and my probation officer. I do care about my kids and my dog, though, so don't get that twisted. I hate them seeing me as less than an adult. Using drugs and being in drug court makes me feel like a bad teenager. I don't want my kids to look down on me.
The best way that you can show them what a good parent in a healthy, sober adult looks like is to accept the long-term treatment recommendations. I've set up for you and show them that you're serious about getting away from drugs. That way they can begin to see you as a healthy, sober adult again.
I I get that, of course. But here's the thing. If I'm no longer on probation and in drug court, I can be happier and a better parent. I'll have more money to take care of my dog and give my kids what they need. My money won't be spent on drugs anymore. My kids will understand it if I make the choice to go to jail versus rehab. They know how much I hate being controlled by others and how much I want my life back.
I talked to your kids yesterday, and they let me know that they are 100% supportive of you going to the long term rehab. They are worried about you. I am too. Your kids love and want their healthier and happy mom back. Attending long term rehab is one of the main ways that people in your shoes can really turn their lives around and have a better chance of a sustained recovery. It's how good parents can begin to repair family problems they cause because of their drug addiction. Also, your kids mentioned that they are concerned that your dog will be given to the SPCA if you go to jail. They told me your ex and your relatives don't want the dog.
Oh, you've got that all figured out. You've covered all the bases. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is so fucking messed up. Look, helper, I'm gonna find a home for my dog. My kids will cope while I'm gone. They're strong, they'll forgive me. Plus, I'll be a better dad when I get back. When I get out in 3 years, I won't have to worry about court dates and random screens. I'll be able to focus on working and supporting them. It's hard to jump through all the treatment court hoops and also hold a job anyway. Plus, I've been to rehab so many times, I could teach the classes myself. I know it all. It hasn't kept me from using.
I wish you let me help you. Okay, I guess I will call St. Angie's and let them know you're not accepting the bid. Is that what you really want?
I'm done with treatment. I'm done with drug court. I'm going to start working on rehoming my dog.
End of scenario. So take a breath, let it go. So there are a couple of reactions already in the chat, and Kim writes, "Great role play." Uh, so I'm wondering, and many thanks, Idea, John. Thank you so much for your reading. Excellent, greatly appreciated. Yes, Tracy, round of applause. Round of applause. Excellent. So yes, Esma's got the electronic applause going. Fantastic. So setting aside the Academy Award-winning performances of both of our readers for just a moment, I just want to ask, absolutely, I agree. Both readers were excellent. Just want to ask, does anybody have any reaction or any thought about that? Any reaction or any thought about the scenario, about the, yeah, go ahead. I hear somebody on. Go ahead.
I was gonna say,
Go ahead.
as the counselor stated that, you know, they were not trying to force Tara. However, the whole scenario showed like you had a plan for him or for Tara,
Yeah.
and you were pushing it. I don't even know the if the counselor was allowed to even talk to the family. So I don't know what that looks like as far as if they cross HIPAA or anything like that.
Yeah.
Trying to find treatment for Tara, but yeah, it wasn't a supportive relationship.
Okay.
It wasn't a working relationship to me where they were working with the client, even though the client signed paperwork, they were not trying to work with the client, and it was just like, you either do this or you do that.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much for starting us off. And people are writing so much in the chat, but there's one word that keeps popping out in the chat that I don't know if other people have noticed this word, but it's the word frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So just go ahead, Elena. Go ahead.
Yes, I was going to say, I had such gut reaction.
Please share your gut reaction.
Yeah, to the counselor. The counselor seemed a little bit out of touch with what the person is going through.
Okay.
And was not trying to be, not even supported, but at least listen to the person. So, the person kept saying, I don't want to be controlled. I feel controlled. Leave me alone. I don't want to be controlled by courts and this and this and that. And yet the counselor is controlling and trying to keep that control. That was frustrating.
Okay. And you felt that in your gut.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. Maren, go ahead. If now is a good moment. Maren, you're still muted.
Okay, sorry about that. No so one thing that jumped out at me with that whole scenario was that at one point, I mean, there was some reflection at the very beginning of the exchange.
Yes.
Great. And then all of a sudden it took a turn with the counselor giving the their definition of what a responsible adult was. And that to me, I was like, uh-oh, because it really wasn't opening the doors to that person-centered counseling. It felt more like a parental role as opposed to finding out digging deeper with the client's perspective.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot we knew about what the client, what the worker thought was important, but we didn't know exactly, there wasn't a deeper exploration of what, and when you said what you said, Maren, it made me think like that worker could have asked an open-ended question instead of sharing their definition of quote unquote what a responsible parent was. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. So many people, and Forrest, I just want to read this particular thing that Forrest mentioned, because I'm inclined to agree with this particular perspective, and I'm going to read what Forrest wrote. I feel like she is only resistant because of her ambivalence. And it's so interesting because I definitely detected her ambivalence. And it struck me, and Forrest, I'm going to just throw this out to you in particular because of what you wrote there. I felt, as I heard it, and as our readers, brought it to life, I felt that the thing that was making her quote unquote resistant was the counselor. I don't know if anybody else did anybody else have that feeling? Yeah. Okay. All right. No. Rosalind, you did not.
The counselor is.
Say a little more, Rosalind.
The counselor is pressed with trying to get this client into treatment, a bed. The
Yeah.
bed is not going to be held for long. And I think
Correct.
she's trying to do her job as
Correct.
well as, trying to work with the client. But she's pressed too.
Okay.
And the client is saying one thing and saying another. The
Yep.
client wants to do better for his kids, but you do better by going into the treatment. You've been to treatment for how many times? Several times.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Yep.
The ultimate goal is you want to do better for your kids. How do you do that?
Okay.
Hey, we got to get a move to it. Let's get into treatment. Okay, let's get into this service. In other words, I hate to use this word, pussyfoot around. Come on, let's get going. Okay. You want that ultimate goal, that crown. Okay. How do we get there? Okay, that's my point.
Thank you, and I love your point. And it's clear to me that you feel absolutely nothing about the scenario. No, I'm kidding. Thank you for thank you for your passion as the way you said it, and you kept asking a question that I thought was so powerful. And Marin, it made me think of
How do
our
you get
little.
there?
Yeah, the question of like is how do you get there? And the worker had one idea of how you get there and was committed to that idea. So we're gonna let a few other people comment.
I think,
Oh, go ahead. Who is that?
Susan, I think what happened, they both were frustrated.
Yes.
On both parts. You had the client who knows they need to do something, but is not ready to do anything other than what his plan was.
Yep.
And you have the counselor who's trying to, I don't want to use the word enforce, but it seems like trying to force this idea down his throat that this is what you need to do.
Yep.
And it's not going to work because everybody now become defensive.
Yep.
Because they have their own agenda or idea of how to get there.
Yeah.
And the question should have been, what is it that you really want to do in terms of, your life? And yeah, we must take in consideration you have a family and all this. But at the end of the day, like he said, he's been in and out of treatment forever and it hasn't worked.
Yep.
So it has to be what would motivate him.
Yep. Okay. All right.
And also point out the fact that when you're going back and forth to court and you do the time, you still got probation when you get out. You're still under the control.
Yep.
So, all those things should have been considered too.
Fantastic.
As part of the argument.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Susan. And somebody noted in the chat, and yes, there are multiple paths to recovery. And I did want to just acknowledge before we go to Caitlin and then to Forrest and then to Emmy, is that Kim wrote in the chat that this was a great example. This was an example. She didn't say great. I don't want to embellish what she wrote, but she said this was an example of a circular conversation. So I'm glad that I was able to capture that in the scenario. So we're going to go to Caitlin, we'll go to Forrest, and then we'll go to Emmy, and then anybody else who wants to comment. Go ahead, Caitlin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Paul. I just wanted to point out, I think as professionals in this space, it's so hard for us because we lead with so much passion and love and support for the people that we're trying to work with. But I hear it all the time from my colleagues, and it's something that's always stuck with me since I've been in this field, is we can't work harder than our clients. We can give them the resources and we can meet them where they're at, but it is up to them to take that final step. And I love what Kim just said, that circular conversation.
Yeah.
And maybe some people would look at the scenario and say, wow, this counselor is really cold, or they're not doing their due diligence, they're not doing their job, but really they're just providing the resources that they can. And it's up to that client to take that next step. So we just have, as professionals, we have to protect ourselves too. And if that means, being a little bit direct and coming across as cold, it sucks that it was perceived that way, but I think she was just doing what she could do in that moment.
Okay. Okay. Caitlin, can I just, before we go to Forrest, can I ask you a quick follow-up question?
Of course.
Thank you. As you know, I was excited to share this scenario with the learning community. I still am. And my question to you is as you heard the scenario read out so well, did you feel at any moment that the worker was trying to convince the woman to go take the bed?
I think that the the script itself and the way it was read was very much, here are the available resources, not very much like convincing, let me sell you on this concept. It
Okay.
was, that reiteration of these resources are available for you. We are here to support you with these resources,
Okay.
and kind of offered it up, and then reiterated that concept, but didn't feel pushy or over the top. I personally thought it was a good balance. And I worked in community healthcare for a while, where I feel like so many of my colleagues that work directly with their clients probably have this exact same conversation time and time again. Again, I just come back to, you can't work harder than they are. You have to give it to them. And if they don't take it, well, someone else will, unfortunately. And that person hopefully will come to it at their own time.
Okay. Okay. And Caitlin, I love the last, I love everything you said, but I love that last sentence you said, they'll come to it in their own time. And it brings me back to, this is where planting seeds
Yes,
can
sir.
can have an impact on that time.
Yep, absolutely.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. Forrest, thanks for your patience. The floor is yours. Then we're going to go to Emmy and then Elena. Go ahead, Forrest.
Well, to kind of reiterate on what I was saying is the only reason that we're calling her resistant is because she's not doing something that we want her to do.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because I've done that with people. Oh, they're being resistant, but it's only because it was something that I didn't want them to do.
Okay.
Right. And
Yep.
it's never my path. It's always their path. And there was no like a lot of people said, nobody even asked this person, well, what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
The question was never even brought to the person. So how do we know what they want to do if it's not even asked?
Okay. 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 And Kim writes, yes, Forrest, exclamation point. Emmy, the floor is yours. Go right ahead. And then we're going to go to Elaine.
Hi, I guess for me, the one thing was mainly that the counselor didn't give enough information on
Okay.
the rehab, right? It's long term. It's not, what does long term mean? Does it mean that you're going to be there for 28 days? Does it mean that you're going to be for 3 months? Is it a year long term?
Uh-huh.
Maybe giving the client a pros and cons list, right? It's sometimes easy enough where you're going to go to jail, you're going to wear an ugly orange outfit, you're going to be stuck there for 24 hours a day, 1 hour out in the sunshine. It's not jail, it's prison because it's 3 years.
Yeah.
Right? Your long term is going to be a 6 month, whatever the time frame is of the rehabilitation, but you'll be able to have, sunshine. You'll be able to wear your own clothes. You'll be able to,
Yep.
have a nicer visit with your children.
Yep. Yep.
Right?
And
Things like
you're
that.
suggesting these are things that the worker should have told her.
Yeah, because if you're just going to tell them you're going to long-term rehab, you're not telling that person anything, especially when they come back to you with, I've been to so many rehab centers already, I could teach the class myself.
Yeah.
What's the difference with this location that I'm offering you, right?
Yeah.
What's going to make it a better choice? And if you give the person, for me at least, if you give the person both scenario pros and cons,
Yeah.
I think it'll help that individual make the better choice for them, not
Okay.
just the frustrated choice, right? But the better choice.
Okay. Okay. Can I share an idea with you and get your reaction to it?
Yes.
And then we're going to go to Elena, and then I want to ask the whole learning community a particular question. But I want to share this idea with you, Emmy, and then you tell me if you have any thought or reaction to it.
Okay.
As I heard the conversation, I mean, I wrote the conversation, but as I heard it, and as I heard it read out loud, it occurred to me that the issue for Tara was not jail or not jail. It was control or it was having control.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, did you get that too? Did that speak to you? And that was the greater issue. It wasn't about jail or not jail. It was more about who's controlling me and who's going to control me. I mean, any thought or any reaction to that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm guessing the whole process is, it's because of the drug use, right? You don't have control when you're high, right? But that's why I'm thinking the lists, right? Let them do it with them, do it with
Okay.
her, right? Where
Okay.
she has control of what she's seeing, and she's, and you don't tell them you have to go here, but let's just weigh out the pros and cons.
Yeah.
That kind of gives her a little bit of anonymity in the process, right? And it might show her that she does have a little bit of control in the process, because you're making her part of the process, not just telling her either to go to jail or you go to long term. What does all that mean, right?
Right. Because it does have a meaning.
Exactly.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
and of course, thank you. And before we go to Elena, I have to read out something that Forrest wrote in the chat, because Forrest, I think you are, and with what Haidia followed to this, I agree 100%. Forrest wrote, and I'm going to read this as he wrote it. Who wouldn't want control over their choices? And sometimes the choices are not like you have option A or B, and both are crap. But you still have one or the other. We're going to go to Elena and then to Elkanah, if you'd like to add something. Go ahead, Elena.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Amy, for your participation and recognizing that the conversation was sort of lopsided or going in all kinds of ways other than circular and not very productive. But I also and I would say that I was on the same wavelength as you are, and I was also thinking that the idea or the opportunity to go to rehab, whatever choices were available for this client, should have been presented at the very beginning of the conversation. We're talking about planting seeds. That was a lost opportunity to plant a seed.
Okay.
Establishing what this is, and this is, by the way, your choice. Tell me what you think. How do you feel about this as opposed to that? But it should have been established at the very beginning of the conversation and not at the last moment. They say, well, forget it then, somebody just do whatever you want,
Okay.
because that sounds very resentful, sort of.
Yes. And Rosalind writes in the chat, how long do you wait? In working with clients, you can still work with them regardless of regarding their situation, however, with urgency. Yeah. And again, I clearly, and I wrote it this way intentionally, clearly there was an element of urgency here. And I particularly wanted to bring that up because it's an easy trap to fall into. And whose urgency is it? And it was clearly the workers' urgency in this particular situation, because the bed may vanish, because the opportunity may vanish. Elkanah, the floor is yours, and then we're going to go to John. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there is a lack of empathy from the counselor's side, in that the counselor should have tried to build a rapport.
Okay.
Understanding the lived experiences.
Okay.
Right. I think that should have been very helpful.
Okay. So I couldn't agree with you more, that there could have been more about building rapport or more trying to understand it from her perspective.
Right.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. Yep. John, go ahead. The floor is yours.
All right. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
The counselor missed an opportunity when the recovery mentioned that they had been through so many rehabs, they could probably teach it. She missed an
Okay.
opening.
Yeah.
So what didn't work, the rehab or the person?
Right. Right.
And I'm guessing that the rehab didn't work.
Yeah.
So there was an opening there to find a rehab that made sense to the individual,
Okay.
rather than, well, I'm sorry to say this, but 90% of the rehabs in my area are nothing more than AA, NA boot camps. And maybe that was it. So
Yep.
find a rehab that makes sense to the individual,
Understood.
at least respect the individual's autonomy.
Yeah.
Good luck. Good luck.
Yeah.
Say more about good luck. What do you mean by good luck, Rosalind? Go ahead.
That's difficult. Individuals in drugs, rehab, that is very difficult.
Yes.
That's very difficult.
Yes.
It's very difficult. So it's like,
Very
well,
difficult.
this rehab didn't work. This rehab didn't work, Just thinking about that actor, from Friends, rehab didn't work.
Yeah.
It
Clearly.
didn't work. It
Yeah.
didn't work.
Yep. Yep.
May I say something?
Yeah. Actually, Tiffany, you can in just a moment. We're going to go to Sebastian and then we'll come right to you because Sebastian has their hand up. So go ahead, Sebastian, and then we'll go right to Tiffany.
Yeah, so from the conversation, it did really seem like the navigator, advocate, or whatever their position was like really, they had the one solution that they thought worked, and they weren't really trying to pull out any of like what was the client's motivation. It was really lacking in like MI
Yep. Yep.
in like trying to come to a solution together rather than just saying like, this is the thing that would be best for you.
Okay. Yeah. So similar to what Elkanah was saying about there was not necessarily a collaborative partnership. There was an opportunity for building more rapport. And Sebastian, if it's okay, before we go to Tiffany, can I ask you one quick follow-up question?
Sure.
So in regard to the idea that the worker had this one idea and didn't draw out from the other person kind of what they thought. My question to you is, why do you think the worker was approaching the conversation that way?
Yeah, I mean, they see a person in crisis and they want to help in the way that they think would be best for the client. But
Yep.
From like everything that I learned from these classes and just from my job, like our jobs are more to help people like facilitate their own solutions.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much. And again, I'm going to just go ahead, Tiffany. Go ahead. Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I don't know. I just feel like meeting people where they're at is very important in the process of recovery.
Yes.
Forcing them or pushing something down someone's throat I don't think that's the good way, or giving a person options, letting them know that your position is to help them along the way. Some workers take it upon themselves to make themselves be the aggressor in a situation where they're not actually helping, but they're making the person feel extremely uncomfortable, especially when there's a court case or something like that involved in their situation.
Yeah.
You have a lot of people taking advantage of their situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes in recovery, from what I've seen, the best outcome is having people who've been there, done that, work with that individual along with the workers.
Understood, because they've lived the experience and they're able to be a really informed guide.
Not even that, they're more understanding.
They may have deeper empathy. Yeah.
Because people on the other side is like, all you got to do is say no. You can't. You don't have to do it. at the same time, they're not realizing their addiction with food or candy and so forth.
Yes.
So it's a struggle. Everybody needs to understand nobody's perfect, and
Yeah.
whether we're helping someone with their drug addiction, and make sure to understand we all have our own addictions.
Yes.
And just to be more understanding. That's all. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you, Tiffany. And before we go back to Elena for just a moment, I want to read a couple of the chats that came in, and there are many of them. So please forgive me for not reading all of them. But there are a couple that just came in that I just want to make sure that I'm going to read them out loud. Amber wrote, all we can do is provide the resources available to the client in detail, and then discussion decisions should ultimately be made by the recovery. Less about the counselor wants and more about the recovery. Also, open-ended questions should have been incorporated into the conversation to see what issues were previously felt by past rehab. Absolutely, and other people have mentioned that too. Leah writes, what happened between the first meeting to this meeting that she wants to change the plan? Okay, excellent question. Ashley writes, from personal experience, I've already had several conversations with the client who defies the process. And unfortunately, I've had a time or two where I've already gone into the conversation defeated, so I don't even try. Kim also writes, maybe a CBT, pros and cons for choice. CBT chart. Okay, thanks, Kim. All right. Elena, the floor is yours. Go right ahead.
Thank you. I think this sort of situation is a multi-faceted sort of solution requiring situation. I think the counselor or the case manager, the worker is there, and I'm sure they have the best intentions in their heart to help someone.
Yes.
That's why they are there, but they're also trying to do a job.
Yes.
And oftentimes the supervision is not enough.
Yes.
It's not supportive, and it's not educational, and it's not informative, and it's not corrective in a compassionate sort of way that is necessary. And then it comes to the administration that is happy by just accumulating more and more clients on the roster so that they can collect more money.
Yep.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
And then
it's a business. There's a business element of it. Yep.
Exactly. So, the person-centeredness is missing, and is oftentimes as well misunderstood.
Yeah.
When we say meet the person where they're at, doesn't mean let them do whatever the heck they please. It's presenting them with opportunities. I mean, like you say, planting the seeds of opportunities so that they can see, okay, this is where you are, but these are your choices. This is where you can go. And this is your decision, your opportunity to assert yourself. So, but that comes, I think, with education and supervision.
Yeah, agreed. And Elena, you inspire me to want to make a statement that might be highly provocative, but I'm going to make it anyway, and we'll see if anybody has a reaction. Which is that I'd like you to consider. I'm inviting people to consider the idea that planting seeds is far more than offering resources. That planting seeds, when we talk about what was formerly called developing discrepancy, planting seeds is far more than saying to somebody, well, these are the resources. Based on these resources, what do you think will you want, or what direction do you want to go in? That is not the same thing as planting seeds. And what I'd like to, and I'm thinking of Forrest as I say this, what I'd like you to think about is planting seeds is much more, and again, remember, this is not necessarily tethered to the evidence-based practice of motivational interviewing. Being person-centered doesn't mean you're practicing MI, okay? But planting seeds is much more and much more strongly connected to trying to understand the patient or the client and trying to understand their perspective. And the planting of the seeds is the use of that understanding in an intentional way. So it's not the same thing as offering the resources and saying, well, what do you choose? What can I give you more information about? That's not necessarily planting seeds. That's sharing the menu. And the menu is important. The menu is important, but that's not the same thing as planting seeds. Okay? Now, I have to ask you all a question. And it's akin to this idea of planting seeds. And I need you, as before I share the question, I need you to think about it from what we now know about the client, what we now know about Tara, okay? From the scenario. So think about what we know about her. And what I'm going to ask, the question I'm going to ask you, and feel free, whoever wants to unmute. And Rosalind, if you don't mind, would you be willing to unmute first and answer this question?
Why? Okay.
No, the reason, I'll tell you honestly why I'm asking you if you'd be willing to answer the question first is because you've indicated that you're very familiar with this kind of conversation and that you've worked with clients that are in this kind of situation. So that's why you can pass if you don't want to. I'll ask the question and then you can decide if you want to answer it or not.
No, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and then you can decide if you want to answer it or not. And then anybody else who wants to. So the question is this: knowing what we know about Tara, the client. And if Rosalind wishes to answer this, she will.
Okay.
And then anybody else who wants to. What's most important to her? What's most important to her based on what we know? So frame that in your head. And then if Rosalind, you want to answer, and then we'll hear from other people too. But if you have an idea of what's most important to her and you'd be willing to share it, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I think that what's most important to her is the service, getting this client into a better situation, which is this treatment. Let's get them here. And what you're saying, planting the seed, to me, just listening, seemed like to me she could have done a little bit better with the educating as she goes along.
Okay.
You know, in speaking with the client every step of the way.
Okay.
Giving the client a little bit of more. Well, you know what? Let me tell you this. Okay, if you do such and such or what have you, but educating the client along the way.
Okay.
And so, that's my take on it.
Understood. And would it be okay if I offered a response?
Okay, go ahead. Yes.
So I may have not asked the question properly. So I'm going to repeat it because what I felt like your answer was I felt like your answer was focused on the worker and what the worker could have done to be more effective. Okay. And I think, and I understand what you're saying completely. The question that I'm inviting you to consider is what's most important to the client?
Okay.
What's most important to the client from what we know about her so far? What's most important to her?
Seemed like to me her freedom, the freedom. I want to make the decision. I don't want the court, no one else. I don't want the counselor. Let me make the decision. I want my freedom. Okay, I go to jail for 3 years.
Okay.
So be it. But I'm making this decision. It's coming from me.
Okay. So let me just go ahead, Elkanah. Go ahead, and then I want to comment on something that Rosalind just said. But go ahead, Elkanah. Go ahead.
Yes. Rosalind, she's certainly right. I think her freedom, her children, and her dog. Those are three things that I think, you know.
Fantastic. And thank you. And I want to underline, Rosalind, that you also identified that she wants to make the decision.
Right.
About you. Would you agree with that, Elkanah? That
Yes.
she wants to make the decision? Okay.
Yes,
Excellent. Yeah. So she wants to make the decision. Now, I want to throw out for your consideration, and then we're going to look at a couple of slides, but I want to throw out for your consideration, folks, that planting seeds here could be, and Rosalind, I'm going to say it to you as if you're the client, okay, if that's all right. Is that all right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's okay.
I'm going to say it to Rosalind as if she's the client, but planting seeds could be something to the effect of, it is vitally important that you make this decision, whatever decision you choose to make. You want to be in control of your next step. And if you think about it, folks, from a skill perspective or a tool perspective, all that is a simple reflection. Okay? That's a simple reflection. What that does is that plants the seed, and it also reinforces what the client has told us is most important to her. Okay? And what I'd like you to consider is that that starts to create a foundation upon which the person can consider the option. Again, if we as the worker are not pushing for a particular option. So just keeping that in mind, that is one seed that could be planted. Is there anybody else who wants to unmute and answer the question?
Oh.
And Rosalind, my apologies for not asking the question more clearly, but answering the question of what's most important to Tara, the client. Does anybody else want to unmute and comment on that? What's most important to Tara, the client? Go ahead, Maren. Who was that?
Yeah, that was
go
me,
ahead,
Paul.
Forrest, and then we'll go to Maren. Go ahead.
I did put in the chat that if I'm planting seeds, that means that I need to tell her the truth as well. And this is the truth. This is what's happening. Here are your choices, and these are what you have to choose from. Now, we can amend some of these choices, and you can do some. There are some things that you can do on your own. But if I'm being honest with her, I gotta tell her the truth about what could happen and what couldn't happen.
Understood. And what I'd also throw out for consideration in terms of what Forrest said is that actually could come from her as opposed to us. We could actually say to her, and Forrest, this is just an example of an open-ended question. We could say to her, given the current situation, what do you see as the possible outcome of this particular option? And what I want you to consider, folks, is what comes from her is much more powerful than what comes from us, whether you're practicing MI or not. So just keeping that in mind too. And it also increases our understanding as well. Maren, the floor is yours.
I agree too that control was so important to this client, so much so that even when the counselor was pointing out that the kids were 100% supportive, that it was almost like it fell on deaf ears, because on one side of that conversation, well, I want to show my kids, that I'm responsible adult. And then it was just like, well, yeah, your kids are supporting this of you. And it was so, with the stages of change, so much in pre-contemplation that it's just finding that tiny crack. And I love the seed analogy because of, even when you plant the seed, it's really up to the client's journey as to when that seed is going to germinate. And that could be years.
Yes.
Or, maybe months, hopefully.
Yes.
Or weeks,
Or hours or days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So Maren, can I ask you a quick follow-up question? Because you are teasing out a subtlety in the communication. And again, if, we may not, in the course of our brief time together, we may not be able to go as deep as the subtlety that you observed. And since you observed it and you brought it to the table, and again, I'm reiterating this subtlety because I'm curious. The question that I'm going to ask you is, I'm curious is, what seed would you plant in response to this subtlety that you've observed? And let me be specific, folks, about what I mean. Maren just pointed out that when the worker said, hey, I just want you to know, I've spoken with your kids and they're 100% behind this. That even with that information, there's something more important to this individual at this particular moment that is causing them to be like, yeah, that's great, and I'm still making this choice. So since you've observed that and observed that really, that is a subtlety that could be lost in this conversation because there's so many other things. But my question to you, Maren, is if you were going to plant a seed in regard to what you take away from your insight as what's most important to this client, what would you say to her?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one because
I know,
different routes to go, and I think I'm gonna give kind of a vague, general answer.
We're working together. We're in the learning. Go ahead.
I think it would really be the focus for me would be like, what is it that is motivating this person to change, and asking more questions about their choices, or as was mentioned before, what was it that didn't work about rehab the first 3 times? Trying to figure out a balance of motivation and the barriers.
Yep. You'd want to deepen your understanding of her experience.
Exactly.
Fantastic. And I hope that every one of us would want to do that we could let go of our agenda. You got to get into this bed, at least for a moment or two. At least for a moment or two, to increase our understanding. I'm actually going to say something, Maren, and I'm going to say, if you don't mind, like I did with Rosalind, I'll say it to you as if you're the client. And you tell me if you have any reaction to it. And it's in the form of a reflection as well. Top priority for you is you make the decision.
So if I were the client, well, great. I absolutely am going to, because I've thought this through, and
okay.
Basically it sounded like the client's mind was already made up.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And that's an interesting point too. And we could spend a lot more time on that too, which we may not be able to, but that's a very interesting point as well. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Tracy. The floor is yours.
Yeah, Paul, when you and Maren were having this discussion, I started thinking about what was my resistance to the client's preference? Because somewhere inside of me, I felt like that their preference on how they wanted to control their destiny, and in this case, it sounded like that they were leaning towards going towards jail, was somehow a bad choice that might be poorly reflected on me somehow, or that somehow I failed the client, or the system has failed the client, or whatever narrative is going on in my head. And I know from the experience I have had in my limited role, that I find that a lot of times if I reflect back on that, I can get to that point, Paul and Maren, where those other questions, those seeds can be planted. You know, where I can ask the question, or say, it sounds like that this is what you really want. You know, you want control or whatever, and take that bias or that story or whatever it is that's I'm putting out there away from the conversation.
Yep. Yes. And that I love the Tracy, thank you so much. And I love the process that you described, which is that process of self-reflection about like, well, why am I so invested that this woman not go to jail? Is it about me? Is it about her? Is it a combination of the two? And can I suspend that so that I can really try and see it from her perspective? Yeah. Powerful, powerful question. Powerful question, Tracy. Brianna, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that Tracy just brought up something that no one else has talked about yet, is why can't jail be an option that gets someone clean and sober? And it's interesting to me personally that I didn't even think about that, because I'm someone who has been to rehab 6 times, never worked. Now I'm 2 years sober after going to prison, not rehab. So why can't jail be a good option?
Yeah, yeah. Brianna, thank you so much. And, you know, it's so interesting, which is that I think it's a powerful thing, the investment that we can have in thinking we want what's best for this person, and we think we know what's best for this person. And I'm going to say this, and it may not be popular, but we don't. We can't know what's best for them. They will choose what they think is. Doesn't mean we can't plant seeds. Doesn't mean we can't build rapport. And I'm thinking of Elkanah as I say this. But ultimately, they make the decision. Tiffany, thanks so much for your patience. Thanks for letting me finish that. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem. I just wanted to say that jail is not an option. Nobody says, oh, you know what? I can't take the freedom of a rehab. You know, I have to be forced. Let me do that 3 to 6. Nobody does that. Like, jail is not an option. And the reality is, if you have good connects, you can get drugs in jail too. It's all within that individual. You know,
yes,
you're meeting them where they're at. You lay down the recipe. When they come with the pots and pans, you know they're ready to cook.
Yeah, and I like your analogy there, and I will say that sometimes planting seeds help people locate the pots and the pans so they can cook. And I do really want to honor the generous I statement that Brianna made in our learning community. And I want to acknowledge, if I heard you correctly, Brianna, you said that jail was the option that brought you to sobriety, and that you presently are 2 years not using substances because of your experience, your incarceration experience. So I just want to honor the fact that you shared from your experience, and I just want to make sure I got that right.
Hello?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to butt in. Hi,
No.
it's Susan again.
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
You know, I've been on both sides at this point. I've worked in a program for substance users in prison.
Yeah.
I have my KSAC, and there have been times where some people just couldn't, it wasn't that choice to go to rehab. They
Yep.
did 20 times and it didn't work.
Yep.
Unfortunately, sometimes going to prison and seeing what is real changes someone,
Yeah.
makes them understand that, I don't want to come back here again.
Yep.
I don't like this choice that I made.
Yep.
It might be something better for me.
Yeah.
And then while you're there, you come to the realization, I don't need the drugs either. Because whether you're in rehab or in prison, you can get something.
Yep.
That's the bottom line.
Yep. Yep. Thank you, Susan. And Eugene just wrote in the chat, not always. And I want to touch back on something that Tracy said, because Tracy, this kind of came up for me as I got to hear this scenario again. It's so unfortunate that this scenario is so uninteresting and so weak that we can't really have much of a conversation about it. Kidding. I'm so glad that it's generating this depth of conversation and reflection. I want to acknowledge, though, that as a worker, I can imagine that there's a part of me, and I'm imagining because I've not been in this situation, but I can imagine there's a part of me that would do whatever I could to try and keep somebody from going to jail. And I love Tracy's insight in regard to this, because I need to know that about myself. Because it's more important that I understand it from that person's perspective, because I don't want to insert whatever, quote unquote, my agenda might be, because that could and Tracy, this is my big takeaway from what you said, is that my agenda can actually keep me from more deeply understanding it from the person's perspective. And that's not going to help me plant seeds. That's not going to help me build the rapport that Elkanah was talking about. And that's not going to help me to support this person to exercise their autonomy in an informed, not reactive way. And I will throw out, and you may or may not agree with me on this in regard to this scenario, but I will throw out for your consideration, and this may seem like a harsh statement, but I'm going to put it out there for your consideration, that in this scenario, this worker is actually partly responsible for the client choosing to go to jail. And it's the worker's caring and over-involvement that pushes the client into that direction. So I just want to underline that. Yeah, John says, yes. And Maren writes, go ahead, Maren. Do you want to unmute, or did you want to just? No, okay, I'll read it. I am curious to check this. Okay, let me just read it. I am curious to check this out later. So important to look at all components of this scenario. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And again, I wrote it in such a way that I wanted it to speak to the complexity of how much caring can actually have the opposite impact. So having said that, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to look at a couple of slides that just will sort of reinforce this. And then I want to come back to the scenario. We're not going to read it again, but I want to come back to it because I really want us to be thinking about how we could employ planting seeds in this conversation. The outcome might be the same, but it doesn't mean we still can't plant seeds. And it also may mean that we could let go of the pressure of the agenda. So I'm going to share my screen again. Let me just quickly check the chat. Amber writes, being closed-minded is not beneficial to anyone, both client and worker. Again, my opinion. Excellent. Thank you for sharing your opinion. John writes in the chat, he shares a resource, Why Prison Isn't the Answer, a personal reflection on addiction and recovery. Yeah, absolutely. And John, thank you for sharing that resource in the chat. So I'm going to share my screen again. And again, I just want to underline a couple of things. And I think we've clearly identified this and captured it, is when we know that a conversation is stuck. And the sad thing about this conversation is it's stuck and it results in an outcome. And in an outcome that maybe the worker doesn't feel so good about. And that maybe the worker feels like a failure because of. And I'm just guessing that. I don't know how the worker feels in this. I can tell you, and I'm making an I statement here, I imagine that if it was me, I might feel like I failed as the worker. And partly there's what I might call an overt failure that I might feel, but I also want to underline a covert failure that I might acknowledge if I did the kind of reflection that Tracy is inviting us to consider. The obvious failure would be like, oh my God, the client is not taking advantage of this resource that I worked my butt off to get for them. And that may feel like a failure. And the more subtle and perhaps more impactful failure is that I actually failed to respect this person's autonomy, and I failed to understand what was most important to them. So I'm just throwing those out for consideration. We've talked about this already, this idea of ambivalence, and clearly there's a lot of ambivalence in this particular scenario, and ambivalence can be a great opportunity, as we know, if it's ambivalence about a particular behavioral change goal, it can be a great opportunity to practice motivational interviewing, and it is a wonderful opportunity to also plant seeds, even if there is no desire to change at any particular moment. Again, a couple of things to keep in mind about ambivalence. It's common, it's normal, it's part of the human experience, it's part of the change process if somebody is considering change, and it is not resistance. Because somebody is looking at both sides doesn't make them resistant. It makes them, they're considering. We know that motivational interviewing is composed of these elements. It's a person-centered, a client-centered conversation. When it's the practice of MI, it's focused on an identified behavioral change goal that the person actually feels ambivalent about. And what the worker is doing is they are intentionally guiding the conversation to explore that ambivalence, both sides, and help that person. And Forrest mentioned this earlier, their change talk, to help them to verbalize their desire, ability, reasons, and need to want to make a particular change. Now, Amber wrote in the chat, how do I keep healthy detachment rather than pushing agenda or whatever is going on inside me, reacting to my sense of expectations and outcomes? Kim, that is a very powerful question. And that question, I think we could probably spend another 3 hours on, which sadly we don't have today. And I think it comes down to what Elena said earlier about the use of supervision. I also think that it's about self-awareness in the moment, and it's being aware of, are we collaborating in this conversation or are we wrestling with each other in this conversation? And that scenario is a good example of a wrestling match between the worker and the client. So one of the things to keep in mind that we can always go back to, which is not the practice of MI, but it's the way of being, is we can focus on, and I'm thinking of what Elkanah was saying about building rapport, we can focus on building a partnership with this person, accepting this person where they're at this particular moment, offering compassion, and then empowering this person to make whatever decision is the best decision for them. Again, sometimes that best decision does not line up with what we think is best for them. Now, the idea of planting seeds, and we know, which is formally known as developing discrepancy, it's a strategy that we can use. And it intentionally invites the person that we're talking to reflect on and maybe reconcile sort of dissimilar goals or action. And I'm going to give a concrete example in regard to the scenario. You're considering going to prison and you want to set a good example for your children. Now, that's a double-sided reflection that's putting two things in the conversation that don't necessarily line up, and inviting the person in a non-judgmental way, without any judgment, to sort of consider those things together. And they can be related to goals, actions, or values. And the reason for it, which again, planting seeds is different than offering a menu of resources. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen as I say this. Planting seeds, folks, is creating the opportunity for that person to see these things together and reflect on what that means. I'll give another concrete example. Possible way of planting seeds using a double-sided reflection. Again, simply because I'm using a double-sided reflection doesn't mean I'm practicing motivational interviewing. It simply means I'm using a communication tool intentionally. You're considering going to prison for 3 years, and you want to be able to take control of all the choices that you make. Help me to understand how being in prison and having control over the decisions you make go together. That's planting seeds. It's taking this one thing and joining it next to another thing without judgment. I didn't say, so help me understand how go. That would be using sarcasm. Okay. It's putting the two things together and helping the person to look at those two things together. You care about your children. You care about your dog. And you're going to be separated from them for possibly 3 years. You'll notice the 3 reflections that I've offered. I've not once said, you know, you'd really be a better parent if you did this. I've never once said, you know, you need to take advantage of this bed because it's a rare resource, and if you don't take it now, you're going to lose it. Brianna writes in the chat, let me read it. Saying, help me understand with genuine curiosity. Yes, I love this thought. And you know, Brianna, I love that you put it that way. It's a thought and it's also an action. It's an action. You're honestly saying to this person, this and this. Help me understand that. I'm trying to really understand it from your perspective. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to share my screen again. So we've looked at this particular scenario. Now, what we looked at was A, and we've been talking about B. Amber writes, I see how jail is not the best decision. Thank you so much for the clarity. Comparing and pros and cons. 3 years is a long time to be away from your family and your, yep. Yeah, pointing out discrepancies. Yes. And again, what I would like to throw out in terms of it, it's not so much pointing out, it's putting them next to each other. And that's a little different because pointing out means, oh, look at this. Look what I'm putting them next to each other in a non-judgmental way and asking the person to help you to understand. Let me ask you a couple of questions in regard to the scenario, because now we're getting into what's most important to the client. If you agree, and you can type an A in the chat if you agree. If you disagree or you're unsure, you can type D for disagree. You can type U for unsure. Okay. But if you agree, type an A in the chat. And I'm going to ask Forrest writes, or could we even ask, tell me about how that looks? Of course you could, Forrest, because that's an open-ended invitation to let the person describe it for you. And it's going to increase your insight and your understanding, hopefully. And hopefully that will give you more material that you can maybe plant more seeds. So if you agree with this, type an A in the chat. And I'm talking about the client, okay? Well, hold on, I haven't said it yet. I'm talking about the client, Charles. And what I'm saying is that what's important to the client is having the ability to make her own choices. If you think that's important to the client, type an A in the chat. If you disagree or you're unsure, type D or U. And I'm watching. So it looks like so far most people are typing A. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna make the next statement, okay? And it looks like just about everybody has agreed to that. So that's important to the client. Part 2. Being a good parent and having her children have good parenting. Being a good parent and having her children have good parenting. If you agree that that's important to her, type an A. If you're unsure, type a U. If you disagree, type a D. Okay. I got a U and unsure. Thank you. I got another unsure. Thank you. A few unsures. Okay. So some people are unsure about that. We don't know if that's a priority for her or not. We don't know. That's fine. Being unsure is okay. But some people are clear that that is important. Okay. Third thing. And then there's only one more that I want to point out. Third thing. Her dog. If you think her dog is important to her, type an A in the chat for agree. If you're unsure, U. If you disagree, type a D. Okay. Yeah. So I'm seeing far more A's. And I even saw an A in a dog. I'm seeing far more A's and a few unsures about the dog. Final thing. If you agree with this, type an A. If you disagree, a D. U, unsure. She doesn't like other people making decisions for her. She does not like, oh, Krista Lee, that was beautiful. I love seeing those flying dogs. Could you do it again? Watch this. Watch Krista Lee's tile. No pressure, Krista Lee. Look at that. Floating dog heads. You made my day. Sadly, my computer doesn't do that. I love that. All right. So folks, the reason that and we have Forrest to thank for earlier making this connection, but the reason I'm asking us all to consider, based on the scenario, what's most important to this client is because seed planting needs to be connected to what's of most value or a goal for the person, not for us. Seed planting is connected to the goal or the value of the client or the person, not our goal or value. Okay? And Forrest had that insight early on in the conversation when he connected it to change talk. Very insightful and right on the money. So seed planting is a way that can help people in the process of consideration and not push them into what could be a rash choice. I want to make one other statement, and it's kind of a repeat of something I've said before, but I want to make one other statement. And if you agree, you can type an A. If you're unsure, you can type a U if you disagree. And this is in regard to the worker's practice. And this is the statement that I'm going to make. In this scenario, in this conversation, I believe that the worker has pushed the client into going to jail. If you agree with that, you can type an A. If you disagree with it, type a D. If you're unsure, type a U. If you want me to just shut up, you can just type that in the chat, whatever works best for you. But to my ear, as I hear that scenario again, and I did write it, but as I hear it, I'm hearing that the workers' approach, the workers' emphasis on the resources, the workers' emphasis on do what I've set up for you has pushed this client to choose jail. And again, we can agree, we can disagree, but I throw it out for you to consider. A couple of final things before we close for today. One, thank you. Uh-oh, those are ghosts. What does that mean? What does that mean, Crystal Lee? What do the ghosts mean? Crystal Lee is going to tell us.
I'm just unsure because, you know, I just feel like there's more to this story. Like, you know, so I don't know. And yeah, so.
Understood. And I want to repeat what you just said, because second takeaway, in addition to what John said earlier and what other people have said, additional takeaway, because it may not be the second one anymore. Additional takeaway, I'm unsure there's more to this story. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's more to it too. And I think there's an opportunity for this worker to course correct. I think this worker could change their approach, and I think they could try and understand it, and they may be able to. Ultimately, the client may still decide. But I think it can be more of a collaboration than a wrestling match.
This is just like
go ahead, Tiffany. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that the whole subject is insane about having jail as a choice, as an option.
Yeah.
Like, do people even understand what jail is or what happens in jail? Like, it's insane to me that people that we're even discussing this, like it's like we're talking about going to Club Med. Like it's some type of private institution of rehab.
Yeah,
This
and
is
let's
prison. This is where you can go in there as an innocent person who has drug problems, and now you come out as somebody who's been raped, beat up, like, why would you even put yourself in a predicament to go through extra problems?
Yes.
Like it's insane. You hear people how they don't give you proper care in prison.
Yes,
You
yes.
don't get proper food in prison.
Yep.
You're actually there with criminals.
Yes.
So it's just like, are we on drugs having this discussion?
May I say something? May I say something?
You may, and just one moment for us. Let me just comment on what Tiffany is saying, and then I'll hand it over to you, and I'll hand it over to Elena. But let's be very clear, folks. I don't think there's any misunderstanding of what incarceration can mean. And I will throw out, as I was writing this particular scenario, I will throw out that I'm confident that this character in the scenario is very clear about what it means to make that particular choice. And to Tiffany's point, violence, harm, assault, physical, sexual, emotional, those can all be parts of the landscape.
Now, if you like what somebody wrote in the comments, of course, if you're in prison because of whatever other situation and you have a drug problem, yes, of course, take advantage of it because they also have drug treatment problems in prison. But just to put yourself in prison because you have a drug problem, I think you have a mental problem too.
And that's possible too. People have co-occurring disorders. So just so we're clear, I don't want there to be any misunderstanding about, and I think it could be partly what motivates the worker to push so hard because of their understanding or their perspective, in addition to other things. And I'm thinking of what Tracy said earlier. Forrest, the floor is yours.
Okay. Our path and how we see things is never what a participant will see, right? And we may think that it's bad in jail or whatever, but that may be the path that they need to take at that moment. That may be what's happening. And as I put in the chat before, we may give them the roots, the roots to grow. It's up to them to take the wings to fly. It's not our choice to get, it's our choice to provide, it's our job to provide the resources. It's on them to take it.
Yes. Yes. And again, let me clarify before we go to Elena. Remember, folks, planting seeds is not the menu of resources. Planting seeds is the use of a deeper understanding of what's of value, what's a goal, what's important to this particular person, and intentionally employing that. So yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
And I'm gonna say I agree with what Tiffany is saying. I definitely agree with it.
Yes.
But right?
Yep.
That person can make their choice for themselves.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you. And Elena, you'll get the last word. Other than, I mean, I'll say a few things when you're done, but go ahead.
Of course. Thank you so much. And thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Forrest, because both your positions are valid and important. And I think they have a place in the continuum of, growth of, whatever assistance, whatever help we can give to people. But one of the things that I think for me, it's important to always keep in mind is to not add to the stigmatization of people that have come out from the jail system.
Yes.
To stigmatizing addiction, stigmatizing people's with life histories that are not the same as ours, and which we consider unacceptable. I think it is very important for me to treat everyone as their own person.
Yes.
Respecting them and looking at them with compassion, because I don't know when I am going to be in that place or if I will ever find myself in that same place.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me think of that very insightful recovery phrase, but for the grace of God, there go I. Yes. Yes. Very, very powerful statement. And And I will underline, one additional thing too, and it's related to what Elena is saying, and then I'm going to show you the last slide so you can complete the evaluation. And I hope that we'll see each other in a future learning community. But I want to go back to something that Tracy said earlier, because Tracy, again, I think that you were bringing a level of self-reflection and self-questioning to this that's critical. Is I could imagine, depending on my values about motherhood and my values about parenting, I could imagine that it could be very easy for a judgment to creep in, where I could be like, well, how could she choose to go to prison when she has these kids? And again, I would need to be aware of that. I would need to set it aside and continue to try and engage in a collaborative partnership with her to understand her perspective, to understand what's important to her. So this was intentionally written to be, how can I put it, provocative. So thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to share my screen and show you the last slide. And hopefully we will see each other in the future. And I will just remind you that if you are interested in a deeper exploration and practice of the evidence-based practice of motivational interviewing, I believe in October, or maybe even this month. I think it's this month too. Check our website, because I think we are offering the 6-hour delivery of that. And I think it's actually this month. So again, thank you so much, everybody. Wonderful to see those of you whom I've had the opportunity to meet in person and online before, and a real honor to meet those of you who joined us for the first time today. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being here.